Welcome to the Scott Abel Fitness Podcast. I'm Mike Forrest. I'm here with Scott Abel. And today, what we are basically talking about, came up with this morning. It's just sort of one question around which to base our discussion. And is are health, fitness, and productivity evil? And the reason I want to talk about this is basically because I feel deeply ambivalent about my role in the fitness industry, because I think in general, the fitness industry does a lot of stuff that's really bad. And it's weird to be involved in that. So basically, I just want to talk about that, with the hope of figuring out like what an ethical way to approach these things are.
Yeah, no, I'm one. I'd be interested, and since we don't have any show notes like prepped or anything, I'd be interested in what the top things that come to your mind when you say, the fitness does a lot of really bad things. Because not only do I agree with that, but I get emails and comments on my social media constantly that are constantly thanking me for doing what I'm doing and being a voice of reason in an unreasonable industry. So for people that are just tuning in and they don't know, like, they don't really have a grasp on who you are and what you do. Yeah, I mean, you're not immersed in the fitness industry like I am. It's not your, go-to, means of how you think and lifestyle and the rest of it. So from an outside looking in kind of perspective, I'd be interested in your take on what we can start from, what you think the fitness industry does so bad, and then we can just sort of project from there.
So in general, I think probably the main thing is body image issues would be the most obvious thing. And related to that would be what amounts to what I view as victim blaming in some sense. To start with the body image issues, I remember, geez, this was almost a decade back, but I was teaching an intro to rhetoric course in a university. And I remember I put up on the screen, and like everybody laughed when I did this, like as soon as I showed it, but it was like the cover of like one of those magazines you see like in the grocery store aisle. And it was some absurd diet, like lose 15 pounds doing some absurd thing, blah, blah, blah. And like every student laughed. Like they all laughed at it. They knew it was absurd.
Right.
But then I also asked them, like, who here has been on a diet? And everyone in the room raised their hand.
Yeah.
And everyone has worried about body image things. And one of the difficult things about this is, like, I think as a society, we all know these things are bad. Like, we all know, oh, well, actually, dieting is kind of messed up and you shouldn't, like, go too far into dieting, yada, yada, yada. And yet, everyone's been on a diet. We all often have, like, weird relationships with food. And I'm not sure how to negotiate that. I'm not sure how to, like, even help people in a way. Like, say you want to help someone lose weight. How do you even do that in a way that's fundamentally ethical? Because I'm not sure you wholly can, right?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. Like one of the frustrations for me, and maybe not even a frustration, because I think a long time ago you were one of the people who kind of told me, like, start reaching people from where they're at, not where you're at. And then one of the things that's kind of confounding with that is what gets the biggest response on my social media and everything we do, Mike, is the before and after pictures of my clients, right? Because that's what people want when they hire someone like me. So that creates a sort of like a conflict right away, right? Like, how much of me helping that person with that particular thing is reinforcing to all the eyeballs who don't know what's going on below the surface exactly what you're talking about, right? Like, it's just buying into the same old, right? And are we part of the solution or are we part of the problem? And how do you, the word you use, negotiate that? That's been a frustrating thing for me for years. I mean, leaving the hardcore bodybuilding, and like, I've reinvented myself a bunch of different times, and not because I had to reinvent myself for business, but because I needed to leave a world where I was part of a problem and not part of a solution, right? So that keeps turning in on itself. Now I'm sort of going another direction again because of age, right? So it's like, how do I get people who are maybe, just in their 50s, not quite my age yet, but how do you get them to sort of leave behind the body image imprints of youth, right? Like, an accepting an aging body for what it is and how it functions. And then going back to, like I said, the most eyeballs I get are before and after pictures. But what people don't see is how often those clients write me and say things like, when I hired you, I thought I was hiring you for weight loss. I thought I was hiring you for a body transformation. I didn't realize you transformed the way I think. Everything I thought this was about is different now, right? And I think the line I've used in a bunch of my, food freedom course and the rest of it is teaching people that your body is meant to be your lifelong partner, not your lifelong project. And I think that's a huge like thing we should put on the show notes and up there, because people nod in agreement to that statement, but they don't live that way.
I mean, yeah, that's always one of the problems. There's a whole bunch of things that I think people fundamentally agree with, but then living that way, I mean, that's sort of a different thing. Going to what you were talking about with the before and after photos, like one of the difficulties with that is that like there's a competition, right? There's a competition for eyeballs. It's an attention economy. And so you get a whole bunch of people, probably like Scott, other trainers online, people online, and like they also think like before and after photos are like kind of BS, but they're all posting them because they know like if they don't, they're gonna get crushed in sort of this like the market competition. And so like we're all doing this thing we know we don't really want to do, and yet like we're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like I'm not sure what to do with that because like that's a massively systemic issue. Like that's not an individual has very little agency to change things. They should try, but it's very hard.
Yeah, and like what did you say? It's an attention
Attention economy.
attention economy. And I've shared this with you privately before. Part of my frustration with that is, you know, 8, 9 years ago on social media, I used to write like mini blogs, right? And it used to be about like the content of what I was saying, trying to help people. And then it was like the attention I got for that started going down, down, down as social media changed to it's got to be visual. You got to do quote cards. You got to do pictures. You got to do, it's all about, get the attention, right? Like, and it became less about writing something meaningful and more about, what's going to make someone stop while they're scrolling through their phone and look at this. And I think it gets tougher and tougher to have it be both. You know what I mean? Sometimes it takes 400 or 500 words to say something meaningful to try to help somebody that you can't put in a 20 to 30 word quote card or an image or whatever. So
Can you give an example of that in terms of like what we've just been talking about in terms of trying to thread that needle of saying something that is actually going to help people versus also, I mean, only having, I don't know, 280 characters on Twitter or a quote card on Instagram or whatever it might be that really you're just, I mean, you're signaling to people who already agree with you.
yeah, I mean, and it's a dilemma I've had for years, right? I prefer the writing, I prefer the explaining, I prefer the layers. Like, it's amazing to me how many people will make a comment on social media expecting a solution to a problem they've had for years and years in a social media post that's 100 words or less, right? And then you try to say to them, you've had this issue for years and you really think that I can in a comment section of Facebook I can address that in a way that's going to take you from point A to point B. It's like people who get the hard gainer solution, who think one training program solves their physique transformation forever and ever and ever. That's not how things work.
So like, yeah, but like also like look at the title.
No, it is part of a hard gainer solution, but it's not the finality, right? Everyone underestimates the process and that there's this goal line that you reach, right? And then it's over. So part of the, like you said, how do I answer the question? Like, what's an example? Just today, as we're recording this, I did a post that was bothering me because of a lot of the times my posts are generated by emails I get. And if there's a common thread of emails that are coming up consistently, then I think it's something I should comment on, right? So one of the ones I got over the last 2 weeks that seemed to be popping up, and I don't know why at this particular time of year, sometime there's no rhyme or reason to it, sometime there is, but more than a few females have written me and said like, they used to compete and now they need help and they can't believe how much they've let their body go from these competition pictures. Look how I looked in competition. And now it's 5, 6 years later. I'm disgusted with myself. I hate myself. How did this happen? And, within the text of what they're writing is the explanation of how it happened. You started living a real life. The competition world isn't real, right? You make your whole life subject to the competition demands, but eventually you have to make the demands of fitness fit real life. And so without learning any of the agenda lessons along the way, then people don't stay like in that kind of lean shape, not even close to it. So they're 30, 40 pounds from that. And then they've got this self inflicted wounding of constant body shaming for years and years. And I can only point that out on a social media post. I can't explain the layers of it in a social media post.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's also another thing too, where I think most people understand to an extent what is going on. Like, if I say right now, I don't think anyone will disagree with this, that what you see on the covers of magazines are not realistic for people to maintain on a day-to-day basis. Very few people, I think, listening would disagree with that or be surprised by it in any way, shape, or form. That said, it influences them nonetheless. Like, you see that and you know, okay, yeah, no, that's not realistic, but secretly I want it anyway. And I want to see if I can get as close as I can to do that. And no matter what, you're a little bit unsatisfied by virtue of the fact that you can't get there. And no matter what, you can't remove that because you're human. And again, I'm not sure what to do except to try to not participate in that. Going back a moment to what you said about the hard gainer solution, I will admit that. So that is something where I felt a little bit ambivalent about the marketing for it. And the way I've tried to thread the needle for that has been to speak to the fact that it is the solution insofar as it deals with the hard gainer dilemma. And after it, you are ready to graduate to a program like, say, 6 Day Hybrid or whole body hypertrophy or one of your more advanced programs. The idea is you are now able to handle that volume after doing the hard gainer solution. So it's not like you just do the program and then you look amazing and you're have put on 30 pounds of muscle or like whatever outrageous claim, but you have dealt with that hard gainer dilemma in a way that sets you up to benefit from those other programs that you would not have been able to before. But again, I'm not totally like that's not perfect in my mind, but also you do have to offer something, right?
And I don't want to make this about the hard gainer solution, but what you said in the initial part of that segment, one of the things that's true about the hard gainer solution is it addresses a specific dilemma with the right principles that you need to adopt, which we've talked about in a previous episode about, like changing your mind, changing your behavior. That's what sort of is at the heart of the program. There's all kinds of approaches to a hard gainer dilemma. That's the particular one we choose for that time. But I want to go back to what we were discussing, because we've talked about this in a recent podcast as well, what you were describing in terms of social media and stuff, what imprints with somebody. And what we have to unravel for them is having unrealistic expectations. Yes, they know the picture on the cover isn't reality for most people, yet if they're envious of that picture, it affects their self-esteem in a way. So as you were explaining that, what popped into my head was, maybe it's because I'm long in the tooth or whatever, but the youth movement and the Insta influencers and stuff, I don't get and I don't understand, and I probably never will. But when we first started on that track, what you were told was, well, if you get on, this social media platform, then you should follow a lot of people and that generates a lot of followers and blah, blah, blah. And then what I started noticing was a bunch of people that I clicked on to follow. It might as well have been softcore porn, but it was under the fitness industry umbrella, right? So that was like fitness this and fitness that, but it was just TNA, and a lot of it was completely titillating and still is, and completely provocative and completely way back when there was no social media, a couple of the magazines that I used to write for were a lot that way as well, right? They even broke off into, sort of sexploitation of female fitness athletes as a whole, like magazine. So again, this is some of the stuff that the fitness industry, part of the problem that it generates and keeps underlining, even as it tells you they're getting away from that, right? Like, oh, your body doesn't define you. But I deal with a lot of people who come out of that industry, competition industry, and they're like, you're the only one I've heard I can reach out to. And their problem is their body still does define them in a way that's not healthy.
One of the weird things about this is speaking more to the men's side. One of the things I've noticed, one of the sort of implicit messages amongst sort of many, in a lot of like fitness advertising geared towards men, like about like get it ripped, get jacked, et cetera, et cetera. is the idea that women will crave you. If you finally have abs, you will finally be like not just sexually attractive, but they'll be lining up for you like a crappy Axe commercial, right? And the like most people who've been through this, like I can also speak to this, like I was obese and I lost a lot of weight and like that made a difference. On the other hand, what did not make a difference was going from like apologies for the numbers, but like going from like 13% body fat to like 8 or 9% body fat, like no difference. Like no difference in terms of that at all. It was all the other things that mattered way more, but like a lot of the advertising tells you secretly like this is what will happen. Another thing related to like those implicit messages in advertising has to do in a weird way with like money, status, and wealth. Again, I see this a lot. It's probably true, especially in like bodybuilding, having to do with like get your pro card, stuff like that. But I see it even in just like the advertising for regular people, the sort of the implicit message that like take control of your body and thereby take control of your life and you'll actually get rich and you'll have control over everything and like all your dreams will come true, which is just absurd on like the surface of it. But nonetheless, I think those kinds of messages like they influence people because you can see people kind of conflating those two things. Like losing weight is somehow getting rich or like getting their finances in check, which is just not life, right?
But another thing they conflate, and no one, especially fitness agenda oriented people, ever really go out of their way to explain, is control over your body. They don't differentiate between control and ownership over your body and obsession with it, right? To a lot of the consumer, they're the same thing. No, they're not the same thing, right? One can be healthy and the other one is not, right? So a long time ago, I forget, I wish I could remember the source, but it was still when I was doing my sociology stuff. But it was like they were saying, like, for the blue collar person, right? Things like a car and your physique represent wealth. Like it doesn't represent that to a person of actual wealth and means, right? Person of actual wealth and means doesn't think that way and doesn't look at those kind of things as representation of I have, right? It's about what you have, like your possessions. And if the only thing you can possess with a lower middle class income is a better physique, then that's a source of material, advantage over someone else who doesn't have that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that kind of social signaling, just in terms of fitness, especially if you see this with skewing towards upper middle class, people making over six figures a year, one of the main signifiers of that status in terms of fitness is there's a lot less emphasis on like getting big or getting muscle. And there's a whole lot more emphasis on like living forever. Like
Exactly.
all the fitness stuff is focused less on like going to the weight room and more on like cardio or biking or like going on hikes and stuff. Like it's a very different set of activities that like they market towards these people. It's all about like heart health and
Yeah, yeah.
looking good, but like being very thin. Like it's completely different in a weird way.
Yeah, and that goes right to social milieu and the rest of it, right? Like in, I think it was Power versus Force, maybe. I might not have that right, the Hawkins book. But the discussion being like, you're not going to have very many upper wealthy people who are members of bowling leagues and the lifestyle that goes with that, right? The bowlers are going to be people who tend to have like blue collar work. They smoke, they drink beer, but the higher up the echelon you go in terms of income, the less likely you are to fit that social milieu, right? And I saw the same thing in bodybuilding. Bodybuilding, a very blue collar endeavor. It's about the body, right? And the other research I saw back then was this was during the height of the Paris Hilton years, and they were showing that people who sort of are from money, like they were born into it, they didn't have to work for it or anything like that. The higher that income, the more money, the thinner those people tended to be without trying, like Paris Hilton's like a waif, and Nicole Richie was a waif. And this was during the height of all that stuff. It was like, it's sort of reflective again of lifestyle and social milieu, right? Because these are people less likely to, I don't know, a lot of the things that would involve, body shaming and the rest of it, right? But they're just sort of on the thin side of lean. They're not lean, they're very thin.
Yeah, one illustrative example of this, like it's not weight loss or fitness per se, but it speaks to this. And I can't look this up. I don't have a citation for it. This is sort of word of mouth, but like I think it's there in the research somewhere. Someone can correct me. But like in the 19th century and earlier, having a tan was like a sort of a surface level signifier of being working class because you were working out in the sun.
I know that I know the research.
Yeah,
Yep.
having a tan is a signifier of leisure because you can actually like go to the beach. And if you can't go to the beach, like because you're working all the time, you are not tan. So like what that means, like having a tan or not having a tan, has completely reversed based on sort of changes in, I guess you could say, like people's material conditions.
And this was this is reflective of this is up my old wheelhouse from sociology background, right? When you start learning terms that depict a wide variety of people, where the word redneck comes from, right? It was from people who work outside in the sun, bent over, and the sun would get on the back of their neck, hence rednecks. Same thing with
It
the
also has to do with the unions.
Yeah, and same thing with the more derogatory terms from years ago, like wetback, and what that signal, right? That was someone who worked in the field, sweating in the heat. That's where these terminologies came from, right? So they had sort of a descriptive element to them, and it fits into the broader discussion of everything we're talking about, and hopefully people are making those connections as we talk about it, right? It's just in terms of what the fitness industry gets wrong is where's the solution to it when that's what people want. Like when I went out of my way a few years ago and I polled some people, females that I trusted, like some were clients and some that were with me a long time, or I wouldn't have posed this question, and some were just people I knew, right? And the thing was, I was trying to get people to understand that the female body is meant to have double the body fat of men. Like that's how they evolve for child rearing and the rest of it. Therefore, it's unrealistic for women to want six pack abs, and it's just going to create another false expectation. And almost all of them wrote back. I mean, I can't even remember one that agreed with me. They all wrote back and said, that may be true, but I still want the abs. It's like, well, do you realize you're fighting against evolution, and it's a fight that 90% of females out there are going to lose? So why would you set yourself up for that kind of heartache?
I mean, yeah, but that's my point. They know like logically that is not logical, and yet nonetheless, I mean, we're human beings and we want what we want, right? Especially when we are bombarded with those messages day in and day out.
And I ended up abandoning, like I had a whole couple few pages of notes that would have turned into five or six different articles about it that I just left because I realized that it's not what ladies are going to listen to. They're not going to read it. They're not going to let it imprint on them. They're going to continue to, being bombarded by what's not good for them. And you mentioned another thing in passing that is discussing this, I think is worth mentioning. How deep we get into it, I don't know. But given the current environment where facts aren't facts anymore, you said, well, maybe there's research for this, and some of you can tell me. I don't even know how much that matters anymore because research is being so misrepresented now on social media, where it's twisted or it's incomplete or it's, said to be saying something that it's not saying, and the rest of it. Like it's, unless you're going to do a real, like, sort of podcast that's just all about meta analysis and all about, the research is peaking in one direction or another. I don't know, sometime a discussion based, like this is discussion based podcast is good enough to get people to start just really think about what they're thinking about.
Yeah, so I mean, especially with research, to me, that research is very valuable, and I
Well, of
think
course,
that
I'm not saying it's not.
it can be misused and it can be very much misinterpreted, especially by like laymen, people who aren't specialties in whatever the research is. Um, but one of the things I believe about that kind of research is, and I think the reason for it is you need to have a fundamental belief in democracy, and that is what research is about. That is about not saying do this because I said so, but do this because here's this research and here's my logic and here's my arguments and here's my experience and yada yada yada. And you can actually you can look up my sources and see for yourself. You can see if I've misinterpreted the research. And I think that's the best way to deal with it. But I also feel like obviously everything we've been talking about, social media, attention economy, all that stuff, that makes it really, really freaking hard, especially when you also have echo chambers, which you can imagine in one echo chamber, say a political one,
I was just
people are
thinking that.
taking the same research, the same facts,
Yeah.
and they're all interpreting it one way, and they're all echoing it to each other, so they feel that's the right way to interpret it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spectrum, in the other echo chamber, they're looking at the same facts, the same premises, and they're all interpreting a different way, but they're all repeating their interpretations to each other. And so the idea of even being exposed to an alternate way of seeing the world is just removed, and things get worse. You get sort of more entrenched in your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, that's the world we live in, right? Like it's mind-boggling that, 2 and 2 is no longer 4. Sometime 2 and 2 is 4 with the following explanation. Sometime 2 and 2 is 5 if you're on this side of that equation, and sometime 2 and 2 is 5 - 1 if you're on this. And it just gets so convoluted that people looking for answers anymore can't find them. I'd like to think that my agenda on social media is to help people. And oftentimes, when I'm presenting stuff that I think does that, I've got followers and stuff who, whatever, if I'm saying X or I'm saying black, they want to say Y and they want to say white. Not to disparage me or anything. They just think that there's value in a constant counter argument. Whereas the person who's seeking answers, they're just more confused by that. They don't feel helped by that. They're like, well, Scott, you just said this, but this guy that follows you said, but what about that? Now I'm confused. And it's like, again, that's a tough nut to crack. I've been doing this, like next month starts my 5th decade. I'd like to think my experience and devotion to it matters more than someone who can find a counter argument, right? Like,
This goes back to that topic from a couple episodes ago, or maybe the last episode. But the idea of the broad strokes. But one of the you have to look for the patterns, because one of the problems with what Scott's talking about is your brain will not really understand the degree to which all the research says this, but then one person says yeah, but what about this? Well, what about that? That's one rando person on the internet. That doesn't negate all the thousands of experts who all seem to agree that this is true. And yet your brain as a human being won't really embrace that unless you kind of consciously think about it. One example I think of that I think this was actually done pretty well. I think John Oliver did this, where he was critiquing the way the media will often talk about climate change and climate change denial,
he's
where
great. He's good. He's really good.
they will often have one person, one climate scientist on, be yeah, here's the problem with climate change, blah blah blah, and then they'll have one climate denier on,
As if they're
and
equal.
yeah, and so what he did to make it visually true, he's okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 climate deniers, and we're going to have 97 people who all believe it's real, and that way the debate will actually be a little bit weighted relative to what the scientific community actually believes,
Boom.
which is a good way to do it. And you do need to make those things visual. Related to what you were saying about complexity and sort of the nuances and things, I actually thought about this when we were talking about what to do over Christmas. And this is also a thing where I admit I feel ambivalent about things, because I feel there's no way to capture every potential scenario. You give sort of general bits of experiences, and there's always an exception. For example, I think generally most people should celebrate a Christmas dinner or whichever holiday, religious, not religious, whatever it might be, at least one day during a holiday, celebrate it with your family and just indulge. That said, I can imagine scenarios where maybe actually they shouldn't, for whatever complex scenario of reasons they shouldn't. But you'd have to take that on a completely case by case basis, right? And I also feel relative to what I just said, with the 97-1, most people should. And I don't want to drop that seed of doubt that, oh, maybe you're the one out of 100 who shouldn't. But I do want to mention it for that one person. And it's very hard to capture that.
This goes back to what we were saying earlier about people's expectations on social media to solve a problem with a short Twitter post, right? Oh, well, you didn't answer my problem. And I learned about, I don't know how many years ago, but I came up with a phrase for it. I call it the yeah buts. So I post something that's an agreed upon principle or an agreed upon way of looking at something or a general guidance. And then within the comment section, you get all the, yeah, but I know a person who did this. And yeah, but my situation is this. And it's like you said, Mike, well, do you want me to do a post that's going to help a lot of people, or do you want me to write a 5,000 word document? Because I can guarantee you the eyes that are yeah butting won't read a 5,000 word document. So you're back to being stuck again. And reminds me of the phrase I've used several times in the podcast that I got from Game of Thrones, which was used throughout all the seasons of Game of Thrones. Belief is the enemy of reason. So you try to present something that's reason, and then what you get people back in, they feel backed into a challenge to their belief system. So the yeah but crowd comes up, right? And it's like what you said with John Oliver, who does, I just love what he does for all the topics that he explains. First, he educates you on it, and then he gives you sort of satirical or comical ways of looking at it. But yeah, 97% of scientists believe in climate change. So it's not a balanced presentation to have one climate denier and one climate change scientist go head to head. That's not a balanced approach at all. Like you said, have 97 climate change scientists and 3 climate deniers, and then you've got a balanced presentation. So social media just throws all that up in the air like confetti and says, let's see where it lands.
Well, so I will say, even outside of social media, I think a lot of like newspapers and other like quote unquote journalists are doing the same thing. They're presenting, oh, like there's both sides of the story. It's like, well, yeah, but like one side's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And presenting it as in, well, there's a debate is you're not doing your job as a journalist if you're doing that. But that's sort of that's a can of worms, which I won't get into.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking the same thing. But, a lot of the times out there, what gets me about the fitness industry is, the problem that it creates is the agenda-based stuff that people can't see. So, like a clear and obvious agenda of someone with a huge following to sell supplements or to sell something, who have the presentation of, look, I'm on your side. I'm going to give you the goods. I'm going to tell you the way it really is, right? It's all, it's a marketing ploy 101, right? But what they're really doing is trying to set up no alternatives for you except to buy their product. They're not really about an agenda-free presentation of information and knowledge. They're about skewing you toward the only conclusion you can have is to buy product X.
Yep.
And I mean, that's a real problem, like for me, because I often get attacked for being the outlier, right? Who says, blah, 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 blah. And then someone will say, well, you're full of crap. Why would I listen to you? It's just like, well, because my agenda is cleaner than that person that you just referenced who has an obvious agenda. If all they sell is supplements, what do you think? What kind of research do you think they're going to present?
Well, this gets into the everything we've just been talking about with the issues of signal boosting, right? Like if a human being hears two sides of an argument and one is just obviously flawed because of, I mean, there's an agenda behind it, like someone's trying to sell supplements, but they're saying if you do X, Y, and Z, you will have the body of your dreams. Even if you know that logically, your brain can't really appreciate the fact that like no, these things are not equal. It will just latch onto that like that seed of doubt that like, oh yeah, but like what if I did what the supplement seller told me to do and I took the supplements? Like those before and after pictures are really good. So like, do I really want to leave that on the table? I want to do everything I can to have the body of my dream. So crap. Like,
So yeah, based on what you just said about the supplement industry and like maybe this time or maybe just that little bit of edge. So, along those lines, people forget my background because it was so long ago, right? The hardcore industry, but I was paid twice by supplement companies. I was one, a sponsored endorsed athlete because I was all jacked, and that had more to do with cycling steroids than anything, even though I represented the supplement company. And two, well, three actually, I wrote articles for them and Ghost wrote articles for them. But three, they kept me on the payroll. Why? Because I was the one responsible for the physique transformations presented in the magazines. In other words, they would send me a guy or a girl, or they would ask if I had anybody to send them for a good physique transformation. And usually because I trained competitors and I was known as trainer of champions, I would have all kinds, especially before the start of the competition season, right? So it was my diet and my training that got them from before to the after picture. And then we would build up this big article influence on how they took this supplement and this array of supplements. And, you know, and none of this would work if you only did it a little while. You got to cycle it regularly and to keep them buying the supplements, right? And then, what I ended up trying to tell people after the fact, after I left that whole world, was even if something worked on a tiny, tiny level, which I'm convinced it didn't because I know a lot more about the industry, we can do that another time. Those differences are incidental, not instrumental, to creating the results that people think a supplement is going to lead to. In other words, the supplement doesn't do the big thing, right? If anything, it does a very, very small thing that would maybe be noticeable to a trained eye, or that kind of thing, or maybe the difference between specimen A and specimen B, but it's not going to be what takes the client who's looking for a transformation from point A to point B. It's not going to be in your whey protein, it's not going to be in your creatine, it's not going to be in acetyl L-carnitine, or like all these other things. And then you've got these what are they, just went out of my head. What did the supplement call companies used to call them? They would create names for their supplements that sounded like sounded like real chemical names, and they would call it
Proprietary.
Proprietary formula, proprietary blend. It was just a name of
Well, I
non.
think that's also so that they don't have to actually reveal what's in it, because what's in it is just like the standard crap.
Yeah, and don't forget, I mean, the other side of the darker side of that industry back then, anyway, was one of the ways they used to launch products that would work as an anabolic agent, testosterone booster, was the first batch or two would be laced with testosterone, right? And because they were actually taking steroids and didn't realize it. And then, of course, after the particular item became popular, then they would remove the steroid because they didn't need it anymore. So, and that was the same thing with fat burners. They would have like drug-like components in the fat burners, and people didn't realize any of this stuff, right? So this is more to the same. Again, it's like hear no evil. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear the magic. I want to hear the fantasy. I want to hear but I'm telling you the reality. And it's like, I don't want to hear the reality. There's still something out there. Like,
So I mean, that's the thing. I think they do want to hear the reality, but it is hard to weigh those things properly in your mind in a certain way. Like everything you were just describing, like part of the reason I think you can appreciate it is because you've been there. You've seen the BS that goes on. Like you've actually been in those boardroom meetings, right?
yeah.
And you were involved in the actual transformation. So like, what was involved in it. By contrast, someone on the outside, like if they're told, well, actually that's BS. Like, it's like, well, okay. Like lots of things I'm told are BS. That's a thesis. That's not an argument, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's very hard to appreciate that deep down. And like you even said, it's not that they think, oh, yeah, I'm dumb and I think like supplement companies are totally on the up and up all the time. It's just that there's that sense of what if. Like that person who's training and things are going well, they want to make sure they get like every possible edge. And so they think like, well, what if? And so they want to do it. Like you mentioned the difference between incidental and instrumental, and they think, well, what if that last, maybe it's only that tiny, tiny like boost, but what if that tiny, tiny boost is like the make or break between success and failure, right? Like, I know that's not reasonable, but like, that's how the brain works, right?
Not only is it not reasonable, that then it would be instrumental and not incidental. So, like little things that I would tweak before a contest to pique a competitor, let's say. So, in that last week, that thing's instrumental to how they're going to perform in a contest. But at 8 weeks out, or 10 weeks out from a contest, or 6 weeks out from a contest, that thing is incidental. Water manipulation, diuretic, sauna, making weight. That's all incidental until the fact that you need it. It's not instrumental from the get-go. So I'll give you another example, and we could do whole shows on this, but one of the things would be like ads that I partook in would be like they would show somebody and put a tape measure around their arm, and then they took our magic product, and then a workout later, look, they gained half an inch on their bicep, or an inch, or whatever it was. Well, even I kept that secret from the supplement companies because I didn't want them, like, I didn't want to think they didn't need me anymore, right, back then. So, right, like, if I knew stuff about the body that they couldn't imagine, and I kept most of it to myself because it kept me on their payroll. So one of the things I used to do there was, if I had a client coming up who I knew had to make weight and it would be trouble, so what I would do the last week is, of course, cut their carbs, sit them in a sauna, dehydrate them for several hours. Then I would tell the supplement company, have your photographer be at the gym, or wherever I decided they should be at a certain time, put the tape measure around their arm, blah, blah, blah. Then they make weight. Then we feed them, we refeed them, we carb them up, we fat load. And then a couple days after the contest, yeah, they wouldn't look as good on stage, right? They wouldn't be as ripped and lean. But if you put a tape measure around their arm, there's your 1 inch increase. So I took that as a starting point, and then I realized I could do that in all kinds of other ways. So what I would do, for instance, is I'd have a client, again, not train arms for 2 weeks. Don't train your arms. Cut your carbs for 4 days. And then I'd send them into, like, I don't want to say where, but I'd send them in, put the tape measure around their arm, get the pictures, or around their leg, whatever it would be, but mostly arms. And then, okay, so that's the before. Scott, when can you have them in for the after? I said 48 hours. They couldn't believe it. They're like, well, what do you mean? So cut their carbs, give them a mild diuretic, and have them not train arms for 2 weeks. And then load them up like a cheat day weekend, pizza, regular Coke, donuts, and then go in, and just before they put the tape measure around their arm again, superset 4 or 5 sets of cheat curls with tricep pushdowns for really high reps, 20 reps, 20 reps, 20 reps. And then when they felt pumped, I would say, when you feel pumped enough, tell them to put the tape measure around your arm. And that's what they did. And then boom, there's an inch increase on your arm. Had absolutely zero to do with any supplements. No supplements were even taken. It's what I knew about the body that I could produce that effect in the same thing with weight changes, right? Oh, I gained this much. I don't know how many articles I wrote where we had to use the word mass. Client X gained this many pounds of mass by taking, magic supplement X. Mass just means weight, doesn't mean muscle. But the implication to the person who's operating under hope versus experience is like, wow, he put on 9 pounds in 18 days. Well, you could put on 9 pounds in 18 days too if you cut your carbs for a week and then eat pizza and donuts. Like, that's mass. That's 9 pounds of mass.
Just to almost throw a wrench into things, and to go back to the original question that started this episode, like, my question there is, would all those things, like, imagine, for instance, that all those things you're talking about, because what we're talking about right now is basically deceptive advertising, really, like, that's what it amounts to, right?
And that was really bad back then, really bad.
Yeah, but what if we imagine that it wasn't deceptive? Like, what if they could deliver on their promises? Like, what if they had a supplement that could deliver on their promises? I'm not convinced that that would actually, like, obviously that would be better, but I'm not convinced that would actually make it ethically good. Like, I think that, like, you're still kind of promoting kind of like messed up body image type stuff. And I'm not sure you could actually claim that you were, contributing good to the world in that situation if you were a supplement manufacturer.
And, well, for one, the supplement manufacturer doesn't give a rat's ass about that. But the other thing there is what I've come to learn now, decades later, having been to the top of the competition, hardcore drug taking industry, and then not, and just being part of the fitness industry and trying to do a better job. And the rest of it is, people don't want to leave that body is my identity world.
People don't want to leave, but like that's created, right? Like, that's created by a world of advertising and culture.
Oh, yeah.
And so how do you not contribute to that, right? Like, it's not just about getting people out of that, but about not actively contributing it for, or being part of that cycle.
Well, I think two things there. Once I got involved with the fitness industry, I realized there are a lot of fitness professionals who don't focus on any of that, who do good work and have a lot of followers, right? Like we've had them on the podcast, JC Santana, the Rachel Cosgrove, the Cosgroves in general. Like these people aren't focusing on, they're focused on feel good and you'll probably look better, not the other way around. But the other side of it is too that I really want to emphasize here as well is I've also learned that I went from being very black and white about it and very absolute about it and very like, this is bad, I'm not going to do that anymore kind of thing. But for a lot of people, like you mentioned at the beginning, a change in body image does enhance their self-esteem, does make them a better person in terms of because they view themselves better on a deeper level. They affect their world better on a deeper level, which is the whole core of this argument, right? It took me a lot of years to learn that. It took me a lot of years to learn that it's not so black and white. There is a gray area. And for some people who have never had that thing, so they overvalue it. And then you give them that thing, and then they realize that thing wasn't the end that delivered them to, it was actually the middle, right? It was like they thought they had to have that thing in order to be a better person, but to be a better person by following a process led them to that thing. So it's a grayer area than it is black and white. Although, I mean, within that, of course, you've got hucksters and charlatans and all the rest of it, right? I mean, that's just true of any industry, right?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I think we're talking about here is the sense of, I don't want to say control because that has some connotations that I think would not be positive in this regard, but agency,
Or mastery.
mastery, the ability to enact change and understand that you can enact change on the world and you can take control of your life. Like in a sense, like that is positive and that can have rebound or reverberating effects in the rest of your life. And that's cool and good. On the other hand, I think even people who are good intentioned can contribute to people becoming obsessed, people becoming basically developing obsessive eating disorders and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure, again, this goes back to a phrase I was using earlier, but threading that needle and making sure you actually are, I don't know, doing good in the world.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's easier to see when you have like layers of experience, right? I remember being upset. Oh, I don't know, this would be a decade ago now. One of the top bodybuilding websites, it might have been bodybuilding.com, I don't remember, but someone sent it to me and said like, oh, look at this person who overcame their eating disorder. And it was a big, long spread, right? And it wasn't that at all. They were misrepresenting this person who had an eating disorder and who used competing in female physique competitions to hide behind the eating disorder. It just gave her a reason to be more obsessed about diet and macros and percentages and grams. I mean, and that was obvious all through the article, right? Oh, now I'm not, I don't have this eating disorder. No, you have this eating disorder. Like you're even more obsessed now about your body and and one of the reasons I think, I mean, there was a lot of reasons I left that world, but one of the ones is it just the lunacy it all became where, and even I was part of this, was you start detailing the anatomy in a way that can never be good for anybody. So in other words, someone diets for 16 weeks to be stage ready. And if they don't have six-pack abs with intercostals and serratus just glowing, they're fat. They came in out of shape. They weren't ready. They were unconditioned, right? And then it gets even, well, their glutes weren't striated. You could see skin between their hamstring and their glutes. And this is like, in that world, legitimate critique, right? It's like, well, how much do we want to micromanage our body to the point where, you know, anything less than that is unacceptable? And for 99% of the population, it's always going to be less than that because you have to obsess about that. It's like that example you used a few podcasts ago about the actor who said when he was answering how he made his physique transformation, oh, it's real easy. You just, basically, sarcastically said, just devote your whole life to it and sacrifice everything else for this amount of time, right? And that's what that world becomes. Yet those are the same people who will go on social media or otherwise and say, look what I can do for you. Look at how shredded and the rest of it I am. It's just like, yeah, but your client can't live that lifestyle.
Yeah, so I mean, the difficulty is they will use very positive, empowering messages, right? That are like legitimately positive and empowering. It's just that they are. I mean, there's other stuff going on under the surface. It's hard to even describe precisely how that kind of thing is working.
Sure.
Anyways, I think this is good for today's episode. Unless you have more.
There's an example came to mind, but we'll leave it for next time as an example of me being caught between two supplement companies. That was kind of an interesting anecdote, but we can save that for the next time.
Yeah, we'll save that. We'll maybe do a supplement episode or something along those lines. So today's topic: are health, fitness, and productivity evil? We would welcome your comments, your own views on this subject. You can find the episode and show notes at scottabelefitness.com/podcast. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think is at stake in these kinds of questions, and we would love to hear from you. But beyond that, we will see you next week.